I was really fortunate in my time as an associate pastor and also working as a retail operations manager for a large pharmacy chain to meet some of the best researchers in cryptozoology in the world. My role as a pastor and my role as doing the research work for BFRO representing Australia for a couple of years led me to meet people who had experiences that because their commitment to the investigations that they were doing was so strong that they'd spend all their time in the field. So their field research was probably better than anyone else's in the world. And because of that, because of the integrity of their research, because of the sheer amount of hours that they'd spent doing it, when they told me things that were difficult for them to perhaps share with other people who didn't have a spiritual background like myself, um, I believed it. I believed it. And one of these events happened to probably the best researcher in the USA and the most committed researcher here in Australia. And when you hear this story, you're going to think, how could two people on two different continents have the same, if not very similar experience and share it with me only 1 week apart? I've been really careful not to disclose information that people have shared with me confidentially. So I'll never name names. It's not about sensationalizing. It's not about having people come to this channel. If you've come here and you're watching this video, it's almost like you've been brought here. And that's more important than hundreds and thousands and millions of people seeing this. But if you want to know the truth about this phenomenon, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, this channel is not a bad place to come and defrag your head and consider some information that might change the way you view it. So what happened? In the space of 1 week, an American investigator, without a doubt, credentials that could not be questioned, without a doubt, never lies, in the sense that he's just never. I've never found him to exaggerate, to not be upfront, to not be honest. It's just not in his character. He shared with me that when he was on the trail in the USA of a Bigfoot, that as he got closer to it, he could hear in his head over and over again, "Leave us alone. What do you want with us? We don't want to be found. Leave us alone. Leave us alone." It was this overwhelming thought that was imparted into him. He said it was like he could just not just hear, but feel these words. "What do you want? Leave us alone. We don't want to be found." And he shared that with me confidentially because he didn't know how to raise that with the other investigators on his team. Simultaneously in Australia, one of our leading researchers shared with me a story that was almost exactly the same. As he had an encounter with the Yowie, as like literally got within proximity of a group of them, he said this overwhelming thought came into his head: "Leave us alone. What do you want to have to do with us? Leave us alone. We do not want to be found." These guys didn't know each other. They did not know each other. They hadn't met. They were working for different organizations. I was the common link. I was the common link between these two guys. They had never had a discussion, or they'd never sent each other emails. And both of them, in a sense, were making their reputation, were making their place in the world. Their identity was really rooted in their cryptozoology research. And the reason they didn't want to talk about this is because it kind of debunked the narrative. So what people wanted this to be, what the shows that they were on wanted this to be. This was far more supernatural. I mean, if something that is like a Sasquatch or like a Yowie has the capacity to communicate in your own head, what are they? We just shared the story in the previous video about the property in the outback where these things were there all the time, coming in the house, getting on top of the house, harassing people. And it wasn't until they played, the indigenous family that lived there played the Bible on CD that these things left. So there appears to be inherently some type of supernatural, otherworldly, or spiritual aspect to these beings. But the interesting part, and I was so neutral when they were telling me this, because I believe what they were saying. I said to both the guys, if they want to be left alone, if they don't want to be found, why don't you just live and let live? Why don't you just stop your research into this and just acknowledge that if that's what these things want, let them have it. If they don't want to be found, if they don't have contact with humans, if they want to be a remnant of some type, then so be it. No, I think part of our human condition is that when we're confronted with losing our identity, when we're confronted with potentially losing our name, when we're confronted with losing the reason we live and the thing that brings us excitement and joy and being known, it's incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. One researcher said to me, he sort of almost laughed and said, "No way, no way." And I said, "Look, I think that if you're having an encounter like this, and I think if you're having this expression of intent or desire from these other beings, why do you keep pursuing them? Why do you keep, and the reason is because for a lot of paranormal investigators, and I'm a Christian investigator, this is not my identity. But for a lot of paranormal investigators, absolutely what they do is their identity, is who they are. And even if they discovered things that might reframe what they do or might even stop them from doing it, it's very difficult to let go of that. So the reason I'm telling you this today, the reason you're viewing this today, is not because I want to expose people who were very, very good friends of mine, and one I still consider to be a very, very good friend. Not to expose them, not to make them seem fraudulent or lack integrity, but just to ask the question, what the heck are these things that on two different continents spoke to two of our leading researchers the same way into their minds and said, leave us alone, we don't want to be found? What's really going on? Hasn't been my experience, but certainly it seems overly coincidental that two people would have that same story. Thanks for being here today. God bless.